Labour are being accused of promoting a two-tier policing system. This follows recommendations by the Sentencing Council to consider pre-sentencing reports for defendants who are women or from ethnic or religious minorities. Now, for those who don't know, pre-sentencing reports are essentially documents written by probation officers following an interview with the defendant and given to judges to help inform their sentencing decision. These reports are optional. They can be requested by the court or a defense lawyer if deemed necessary. Now, the purpose of pre-sentencing reports is to give judges a bigger picture of the defendant's personal history. They may inform, for example, whether it is more appropriate to impose a custodial or a community sentence. Now, the Sentencing Council, which is an independent body that creates sentencing guidelines, has recommended that pre-sentencing reports should be considered necessary if the offender is one or more of the following. So here we've got at risk of first custodial sentence and or at risk of a custodial sentence of 2 years or less, a young adult, a woman from an ethnic minority, cultural minority or faith minority community, pregnant or postnatal, sole or primary carer for dependent relatives, has disclosed that they are transgender or they have addiction issues or they have a serious chronic medical condition, physical disability or mental ill health, learning disabilities or brain injury/damage. So they also include victims of abuse, trafficking and other forms of exploitation. Now, this has led up to outcry from Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, who claims the absence of Christian, straight and white men from this list is, quote, blatant bias. In response, Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood has stated that she also does not agree with the guidelines and wants them reversed. However, as the Sentencing Council is independent, she actually cannot mandate their reversal. Here was Robert Jenrick on Sky News earlier today.
The Sentencing Council published guidelines which we uncovered, which showed that they were going to make changes to the way in which our courts operate, which is going to make it less likely for some groups to get a custodial sentence than others. So if you're a woman, if you're trans, if you're neurodiverse, if you're an ethnic minority, if you are from a minority faith group, which presumably means anyone who isn't Christian, then you would have a pre-sentencing report commissioned by a judge, which historically has meant that you tended to get a less strict sentence, less likely for it to be a custodial sentence. To me, this seems like blatant bias, particularly against Christians and against straight white men. And in a time when many people feel that there is creeping two-tier justice in this country, this seems only to confirm it and will be very corrosive to public trust and confidence in the criminal justice system.
Two things. Firstly, it's very interesting to me. This is a bit of a side note, but it's interesting to hear Robert Jenrick say there that pre-sentencing reports tend to mean less harsh punishments. To me, that speaks to the fact that when judges have more human context about a defendant, they tend to decide that putting them in prison is not actually going to lead to a better outcome for them or for the community. And that often jail does not actually address the root cause for why the person has committed a crime. And in some cases, it might actually worsen the root cause. But secondly, we should think about why the council did not include white or straight men in their list of pre-sentencing report candidates. Is it because of, an ideological hatred or bias against straight white Christian men? Or is it because ethnic minorities or those with mental health issues have historically been treated much more harshly by our criminal justice system than other groups? So let's have a look at the data. These figures are from the Ministry of Justice from 2017. And you can see here that basically at every stage of interaction with the criminal justice system, from stop and search through to arrests to prosecution and right through to sentencing, ethnic minorities are more likely to be treated harshly than their white counterparts. The data also shows that people of colour are more likely to receive custodial sentences than community sentences. We also know that those with mental health conditions or who are neurodivergent are more likely to be criminalised or come into contact with the criminal justice system. So 1 in 3 people in the justice system are neurodivergent. 39% of people detained in police custody have a mental illness. And in the context of cuts to mental health and disability services, those who suffer from those issues receive very little support until they reach an acute crisis, at which point the police are brought in to solve a problem that they weren't designed to address. Now, another group on that list are women. Over half of women in prison are victims of domestic abuse, and more than half are therefore a non-violent crime. And what is true for all of these groups is that they are more likely to be in poverty, which is one of the leading causes of crime and is a problem that prison not only doesn't solve, but often makes worse. So whatever you think of these proposals, it seems that they are an attempt to redress some of the imbalances of the criminal justice system rather than an attack or a deliberate marginalization of a specific group of people. Now, what I would like to see is for everyone going through the justice system to have a pre-sentencing report. It makes sense that judges have all the context to hand when deciding whether putting someone in prison is actually the most effective way to prevent someone reoffending. But that's not what Robert Jenrick is arguing for. What Jenrick is doing is perpetuating this idea, which we heard a lot last year during the far-right riots, that the police are overly lenient on ethnic minorities and progressives. So you might remember the slogan, two-tier care, which Elon Musk and others used to condemn the policing of far-right protesters, in scare quotes, burning down hotels, sheltering asylum seekers, and throwing bricks through mosques. Now, that might be how Elon Musk feels, but it's actually not backed up by the facts, which consistently show that ethnic minorities, that progressive activists like climate protesters and other working class people are much more likely to face aggressive policing than anyone else. But I guess it's always nice to feel like a victim. And it's worth mentioning that the point of that this myth around two-tier policing is to basically say that ethnic minorities, migrants, refugees in particular, aren't being policed heavily or harshly or violently enough, which in the context of the fact that they are already disproportionately over-policed is basically it amounts to a call for a visible, violent policing of refugees, migrants, and ethnic minorities. But when, we're talking about right-wing spin, and who better to call that out than our very own Ash Sarkar, who discussed the topic on Politics Live today.
This is all complete rubbish. This is a misreported story.
Why is it misreported? What's misreported?
One is that the proposed changes are about pre-sentencing
Yes,
reports.
they're reports.
Pre-sentencing reports can't compel judges to make different
they are
decisions.
guidelines.
But what they do is they say, you have to consider this person's situation. I just find this really quite funny because I think that, again, this is a classic case of it wasn't particularly controversial last year. Right-wing media picked up on it. And now you've got politicians being like, oh, no, this is really awful. And this happens not just when it comes to issues like within, the MOJ. This happens with so many social issues.
But does that dispute sincerely held view that it might be a divisive and problematic?
So I think that if we look at it, which is, do you think that judges should have a lot of information about the individual before sentencing them? All of us agree, right? All of us also agree that there is a problem of resources. So what these recommendations are saying, well, why don't we start here with these groups? What I'm not hearing, and maybe you guys can tell me why, is if we know that people of colour disproportionately get harsher sentences than their white counterparts, even when being accused of the same crime, why shouldn't ethnicity be one of the places where we start for saying, all right, the judge needs a fuller picture of what led to you committing this offence?
Well, sentencing guidelines are an incredibly important tool, and there is an obligation for the judges to take those matters into consideration. The idea that your gender and your ethnicity should define the judgment made against you.
But it's not. It's the pre-sentencing report. That's not defining the judgment.
It is definitely influencing it. It is part of the paperwork.
Because it's saying, let's look at this person.
And there is a formula that requires the judge to take those matters into account. I don't think that someone should be judged on the basis of either their gender or their ethnicity.
Well, then
whether or not there are, and I do agree with you that there are rightly social issues that we need to address. Bending the judicial system is not the way to do that.
So that was Ash with Conservative Lord James Bethel. And look, I think Ash was completely right there. First of all, the entire framing of what these reports do is deliberately misleading. The idea that these are reports that, we've gone from there are these pre-sentencing reports which have a long-standing precedent in our criminal justice system, have been part of our criminal justice system for a really long time. All that's happened is that this, independent counsel has said, we want to expand the groups of people that, are entitled to a pre-sentencing report by default, the kind of the prerequisites, the requirements for these pre-sentencing reports. And that has percolated through the right-wing, talking point sphere into, oh my God, they're going to give white people, they're going to judge, they're going to see a white person walk through the court and they're going to say he gets an extra 3 years, that this is somehow like there's going to be stronger sentences for white people and black and brown people are going to be let off the hook. And it adds to this kind of right-wing, Enoch Powell style fantasy around the idea of, the black man having the whip over the white man, that, people of color, the ethnic minorities are running amok and they are lawless and they are, all the police are too scared of being called racist to go after them, even though the data by every single metric shows that the police are actually more than comfortable and much more comfortable going after ethnic minorities than basically any other group. So you have that obfuscation of what pre-sentencing reports are. And even at the end there, the Lord Bethel said, he said, bending the justice system or bending the judicial system is not the way to do that. As I said before, no one's bending anything. This has been a long-standing feature of the criminal justice system. All that's happening is that the people that it's being, the conditions or the requirements under which it is being requested or applied has expanded slightly. That's literally it. And, and again, this idea of, I would never believe that the justice system should discriminate on the basis of the color of your skin, as if this is the beginning of that happening, as if, mountains of academic research, mountains of policy research has not showed that disproportionately people of color, people with mental health issues, but specifically, people of color who experience poverty, people of color who experience mental health issues are much more likely to find themselves in the criminal justice system than in systems that actually are supporting them than their counterparts. The criminal justice has been discriminating against people because of the color of their skin, but we're only noticing it when this kind of somewhat fabricated version of events is coming to the fore. Helena, what do you make of two-tier care? Is there a two-tier policing system? Obviously, in a sense there is, but what do you think about the promotion of this myth that somehow the criminal justice system is softer on ethnic minorities, on trans people, on working, on, refugees, migrants? What do you make of that myth being promoted at, the highest level of the opposition at this point?
I fully agree with you. I think we do have a two-tier policing system, and it is the opposite of the one that we continually hear about in the media with this line that's being pushed, right? It's broadly within this kind of backlash against affirmative action and DEI and things like that that's come out from the right over the last few years, which is trying to paint this idea that these strategies to try and rebalance previous discrepancies in the level to which that people are being treated equitably by broader institutions, as if somehow that is unbalancing something that was balanced previously, rather than rebalancing something that was unbalanced previously. And this, of course, is anti-empirical. We have the data showing that a lot of these programs have been successful in combating that level of inequity along these specific groups, these specific demographics, and they've been successful in doing so. And maybe that you can unwind some of them, but not unwind others. Broadly, once you can see that you're coming towards some kind of continuum where we are trying to at least get rid of some of these imbalances that happened previously, right? Because no one actually wants two-tier justice. The idea that somehow what the right would believe is that the woke left are out there wanting to prioritize these certain identity groups because they believe in this neo-Marxist idea that they are the oppressed, therefore they must be given more than everybody else. No, we believe in an equitable justice system and we want to rebalance it. In the same way that I don't think that right-wingers are out here, they're just fundamentally believing that they should be prioritized and this is unbalancing their prioritization. I think that they personally believe that previously, before now, there was a balance and it is being unbalanced, right? The issue, of course, is trying to impart upon people who disagree with this in this particular realm that, no, we do have the data. We do have the data that does show that these minority groups, these specific demographics, do get treated more harshly. I mean, we've got the Casey review, even outside of sentencing, which is the purview of this specific discussion. When we look at the broader idea of how the police treat minorities, the attitude of police to minorities, the Casey review when it comes to the Metropolitan Police show that these levels of bias were already there, and which is why these programs are necessary to try and undo systemic bias within policing, and of course, back to the subject at hand, within the judiciary as well, when we look at the data that was pulled up earlier in this segment. What I would say, I do have a criticism of the sentencing guidelines that we're seeing here, is similar to what Ash has been pointing out in her kind of media round that she's been doing promoting her new book that's come out recently, is that within this intersection analysis that looks at demographics, that looks at inequitable treatment, right? And throughout all of the lists of the different things that we've seen from what the Sentencing Council want to have being looked at in these future sentencing reviews and these guidelines, they didn't mention class. They didn't mention class once, right? I think there's a lot of social responsibility that's been imparted upon people in these kind of elite institutions like our judiciary, which is allowing people like the Sentencing Council to have a look at how we can redress those things. And I think the judiciary might get bought in on that. But one thing that's definitely going to be something that is out of the purview of these elite institutions is something like class. It is something like levels of poverty, which you correctly said earlier in your little bit there, that it is one of the biggest predictors of crime and of criminality. And of course, I would like to see some broader data, some academic literature on the ways in which sentencing is done, imparted upon people based upon their class background as well as other backgrounds too. And then if we're going to take this a holistic idea of who gets treated worse currently in terms of sentencing, I'd like to see that included, at least discussed more broadly. But of course, our media is full of people who are from posh backgrounds too, all Oxbridge and private school educated throughout our media. So are we going to see a class discussion about that? I find it difficult for that to happen. But what fundamentally most of this is about is this left and right split between equity versus equality. Whereas, again, we all want to see some level of, none of us want there to be two-tier justice, right? But in a right-leaning mind, the two-tier justice is having a set of rules that are different for other people. Once you say these people are subject to a different set of rules, therefore it is now unequal, regardless of whether there was an imbalance before. Whereas when it comes to the left, we will broadly want something that's equitable. We want people to be treated equitably. And sometimes, if there is implicit bias or systemic bias at the start among the equal rules, you have to be able to change them to create the equitability afterwards, right? And that's a fundamental ideological disagreement, right? And that's going to have to get teased out when it comes to how we look at future legislation in all sorts of areas, not just within how we look at sentencing. The problem, of course, is that broadly amongst the right, they've tried to paint themselves, or at least they did up until really the pandemic, as being facts over feelings, that the right believe in that the facts don't care about your feelings. Well, the facts show that these minority groups get treated worse by the judiciary. They get treated worse in terms of sentencing. This is what the facts say. The actual facts show that there is an imbalance already, that two-tier policing did exist, two-tier justice did exist before we had this discussion already, before even these new ideas of changing of sentencing guidelines were put forward by the Sentencing Council. So if you actually want to talk about facts rather than what you feel is two-tier justice because there is a rule that doesn't quite include the group that you belong to, well, maybe you actually didn't believe in facts over feelings all along. And that's something that's really dropped out of the right-wing lexicon, because if you want to believe in facts over feelings and you're on the right wing, you just have to discount all of academic literature, all of scientific literature as well, because a lot of it doesn't reify the priors that you've come to this discussion with. And when it comes to especially how we look at justice broadly amongst Western democracies, right? When it comes to the right, as every single time I seem to come on the show, I seem to have to bring up Will Hoyt's law yet again, which is that when it comes to conservatism, they believe that the law should have in-groups with it which it protects but does not mind, and out-groups which it binds but does not protect. And that comes to the fore when they look at saying, well, hang on a minute, I personally believe that this particular element of our administrative structure, when it comes to the police, when it comes to the judiciary, should be there to protect my interests from this class of people who I believe are the kind of preeminent threat, right? Hence you say, well, there's this broader media demonization of ethnic minorities and of refugees and of people from minority backgrounds, because that's there to reify that belief they have that they should be protected from them, and that's what the law is there to do. No, the law is there to be equal for everybody. It's there to give equitable treatment to people, and that's why That's why broadly the left believe in affirmative action and these broader DEI programs that seek to redress what has been shown by data to be historic imbalances. I just wish that we had class as a bigger factor in these discussions.
Yeah, I think the thing with the class question is that if you tried to bring class into this conversation, you would just blow the entire thing open because, and this is my personal view about policing, basically like if you say that based on class background that, you have to have a pre-sentencing report, I don't think that the criminal justice system exists in order to really hold the rich to account. I think it exists to try to put a plot, like basically exists as a very insufficient and harmful, more often than not, insufficient and harmful response to the social problems that emerge from a class system, that emerge from economic inequality, that emerge from a system where the minority hold the wealth, the resources, the production, and the majority are given kind of the scraps. So if you say like based on class backgrounds, it's like, okay, that's basically like almost everyone that goes through the criminal justice system. And as I said, I would like to see pre-sentencing reports being used for everyone who goes through the criminal justice system, because when you actually look at people as human beings and you actually look at the context of how they have ended up where they have ended up, when you look at the story of the person, oftentimes you will come to the conclusion that chucking them into jail is not going to actually like resolve the root causes of why they are there. Like class is the headline issue. I think when we see these racial disparities in the data, often that emerges from the fact that Black and brown people are disproportionately more working class. And that doesn't mean there are more Black and brown people in the working class. It means that if you are Black or brown in this country, you are more likely to be working class than your if you are a white person, because the upper middle class, the rich are, again, disproportionately white people. And so that's how that's the way that it forms. That's kind of the relationship. And that becomes legible as a kind of institutional racism. But it is part and parcel of that broader question of the police and the question of class. If you'd like to hear more from Ash, her book Minority Rule is now available from the Novara Media bookshop. To order a copy, head to shop.novaramedia.com.